subscribe to my channel and leave me a like and a comment to motivate me to keep making videos. And to help show YouTube that people want to watch my videos and that YouTube should show them to more people. But yeah, so without further ado, obviously it's after New Year's, but this is a New Year's case. A murder. Well, I guess it's not really a murder, but it's a murder. You'll understand what I mean as I get into the case. But, oh yeah, this isn't a Japanese case. It takes place in New Zealand. There is a Japanese case that takes place on New Year's. I think it's on New Year's anyway. The really famous Setagaya family murders. I thought about making a video on that case, but there really haven't been any new developments, and I don't speak enough Japanese to be able to add any new information, really, or any, like, information that only a person who speaks Japanese could add to the English coverage, I guess, of the case. So I probably won't ever do that video. I probably won't ever do that case, but leave me a comment if you'd be interested in it, because I know some people haven't heard of it. Probably. So, yeah. Anyway, here we go. So, this is the disappearance slash murder, but like, most likely murder of Olivia Hope and Ben Smart. And this took place on New Year's Eve in 1998 at a party with over 1,000 people basically gathered on yachts at an island for a lavish celebration in the coves of New Zealand. Two of those partygoers, 17-year-old Olivia Hope and 21-year-old Ben Smart, would never make it back. Their disappearance at the, I guess it's Furneaux, it's Furneaux, so Furneaux, I guess, Lodge in the Marlborough Sounds remains one of New Zealand's most debated and controversial cases. And actually, this case, from what I've read, is back in court. There's been an appeal and stuff, and a lot of people think that the person who was arrested was wrongly convicted. So I'll get into that more obviously later on in the case, but yeah, it's sort of current. So the Marlborough Sounds is a group of islands off the north coast of the South Island of New Zealand. That specific location was the Endeavour Inlet, home to the expansive and ideal party venue Furneaux Lounge. Olivia Hope attended the party with her older sister Amelia and a group of close friends. They chartered a small yacht called the Tamarack, intending to spend the night on board after the celebrations. Arriving early, they docked their yacht and began partying. As the night went on, more partygoers arrived, including 21-year-old Ben Smart, who joined Olivia's group after midnight. Ben and Olivia were seen together as the party dwindled, with most attendees either leaving or heading to their boats to sleep. Guy Wallace figured he was the only sober person at Furneaux Lodge that night, having had just one gin and tonic, or maybe two, on a warm summer's day behind the bar serving drinks on New Year's Eve. The summer's day thing threw me off because I forgot that New Zealand is below the equator, so it's summer. The 1,500 people at the legendary party spot were packed in like sardines at the bar, spilling outside where the live band was playing. Then, like every other New Year's celebration, the music stopped, the bar closed, and the party ended. Around 4 a.m., Wallace was picking up garbage when a young couple asked if he could take them home on a water taxi. Hayden Morrissey and Sarah Dyer were staying at Morrissey's family beat Bach. Apparently a Bach is like a old-style beach house, like waterfront house in New Zealand that's like kind of traditional. It almost looks like a trailer, honestly, but I don't know if it is or not, but yeah, I guess like the kind of beach house you'd imagine in like the 60s or the 50s or whatever. Wallace picked up 3 more passengers before pushing off the jetty. Amelia Hope and her friend Rick Goddard needed a ride to the Tamarack, moored at Endeavour Inlet, as well as a single man. Quote, "Beautiful night, not a breath of wind, nothing," said Wallace, "just the stars out." When they reached the Tamarack, Wallace found Ben and Olivia wanting to go back to shore to find somewhere to sleep. When they reached the Tamarack, they found it overcrowded was checking out Olivia and acting sleazy toward her. Of course, she was 17, don't forget that. And he offered them a place to stay on his boat. And apparently, this lodge, from what I've seen, could only be reached by boat. You couldn't, drive to it. So, getting on a boat was really their only option. Wallace took Olivia and Ben aboard his water taxi, along with 3 other passengers. And when I read the term water taxi, I imagine, a ferry in New York City or something, a pretty big boat. But I think one of the articles said it was an inflatable, boat with just an outboard motor. So I don't really know. It doesn't really matter, but yeah. One of the passengers, a scruffy looking man, which will be known as the Mystery Man, offered Olivia and Ben a place to sleep on his yacht. Despite initially being hesitant for obvious reasons, they accepted his offer, I guess maybe out of desperation. Wallace confirmed their destination and dropped them off at the man's boat, and that would be the last time they were ever seen. Not just seen alive, but ever seen. So the next morning, Amelia and her friends noticed Olivia's absence, but assumed that she had found another way home. However, when Olivia didn't return, her family reported her missing on January 2nd. And similarly, Ben's friends and family realized he hadn't come back and reported him missing as well. In one of the articles that I read, it said that that police initially didn't take the story, take their missingness seriously. Apparently, one of the cops investigating said, quote, "It's just a couple of young people who've gone off on a holiday fling and have forgotten to call their parents." Yeah, I guess you can't really blame the cop for thinking that, because that probably happens a lot, and the person probably ends up not being missing and nothing bad happened to them. But so they were reported missing on January 2nd, and the police linked the fact that they were both missing as being one incident due to their connection to the party. Public appeals for information were made, and witnesses, including Guy Wallace, provided descriptions of the last person seen with Olivia and Ben, and the boat that they had gotten onto that belonged to that person. So the police investigation soon focused on 26-year-old Scott Watson, who had attended the party as well and owned a boat named Blade. Watson's boat did not match the description provided by Wallace, however, though. Wallace described a large ketch, which I'm not really that familiar. No, I don't want to catch up. I'm not really that familiar with the boat types, but let's see what a ketch looks like. It's a 2-masted sailboat whose main mast is taller than the mizzen mast, and whose mizzen mast is stepped forward of the rudder post. Yeah. Yeah, it's basically just a regular sailboat. I don't know. Just a picture of a sailboat. I don't think it really matters that much, but Wallace described a large ketch with 2 sails, a blue stripe, and brass portholes, while the Blade was a smaller sloop with 1 sail and no blue stripe. Let's see what a sloop is. Okay. Yeah, it's just a smaller sailboat. Anyway. Despite the discrepancies in the reality of Scott's boat and the description of the boat that was seen that night, Watson's behavior at the party drew people's suspicion. Witnesses reported multiple instances of Watson acting inappropriately and aggressively. He was also known to get obnoxious and harass women when drunk, with reports of him shouting lewd comments such as demanding that women show their tits. Classy. He even went as far as to sexually assault a woman by grabbing her inappropriately, though accounts vary on what part of her was grabbed. In another disturbing incident, a couple reported waking up in the early hours of the morning to find Watson standing in the doorway of their boat, staring at them. When confronted, Watson claimed he was simply looking for someone to continue partying with. Does that mean he just got on some random person's boat? That's weird. Police detained Watson for questioning and searched his boat. They found it unusually clean, raising suspicions of attempted previous convictions, Jesus, mainly from his teenage years, for offenses like theft, burglary, robbery, assault, and possession of a weapon. He'd been to juvenile prison twice. Forensic tests on a tiger blanket from his boat initially revealed no significant findings. However, a second examination months later produced 2 long blonde hairs matching Olivia's, despite earlier reports that the blanket contained only Watson's hairs. This discovery raised questions about the forensic procedures, as the hairs could have been cross-contaminated with reference samples due to a hole in the evidence bag. Despite these concerns, the hairs were used as crucial evidence against Watson. The trial against him began with the prosecution presenting circumstantial evidence and witness testimonies describing his unsavory behavior at the party. The defense highlighted the discrepancies in the descriptions of the suspect and the boat and the dubious forensic evidence. Despite that, Watson was found guilty of the murders of Olivia Hope and Ben Smart. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 17 years before being eligible for parole. Watson has consistently maintained his innocence, and many believe his conviction was a miscarriage of justice. Like I said, the case is highly controversial in New Zealand, apparently, with very polarized opinions on whether Scott Watson is the one who did it or not. So apparently during the trial, none of the key witnesses identified Blade, which was Scott Watson's boat, as the mystery vessel, and pretty much all the witnesses ruled out Blade as being the boat, saying that that boat was completely different to the ketch the couple boarded, with one saying the only similarity between them was that they both floated. Apparently, the mystery boat was close to identically described by numerous witnesses. There was a photo of Scott Watson on the night of the disappearance, and he doesn't match the description of the mystery man either in that photo. Multiple witnesses also testified that Watson had returned to the Blade well before the water taxi with Ben and Olivia left the lodge even. People who were on the Blade, which was Watson's ship, were woken up by him arriving, and they only noted that he arrived on the boat, not, 2 other people with him. Apparently, only 30% of the boat was actually wiped down, because they said the boat was suspiciously clean, and there was a blood stain found inside the boat, but the blood belonged to Watson's sister, who had helped Watson clean the boat before Christmas. Apparently there were also scratch marks found in the boat on the underside of the cabin hatch, which obviously, you can imagine what that implies. But apparently the hatch didn't have a lock on it, and scratch marks ran from end to end of the underside of the hatch, and therefore could only have been made when the hatch was open. So, critics argue that the investigation was marred by flawed forensic practices and police bias, while others believe that Watson's behavior and criminal history justify his conviction. I don't know, that's kind of sus, because, justify his conviction doesn't mean prove that he's guilty. It sounds like they're basically saying, well, he committed crimes in the past, so he deserves to be in jail regardless. Anyway, in 1999, a human skull was discovered in the Marlborough Sounds, identified as belonging to a young white female. Despite its potential connection to Olivia Hope, the skull has not been definitively linked to her. So, yeah, there's that. Since Watson's conviction, there have been numerous developments and ongoing debates regarding his guilt and the integrity of the investigation. In 2016, Watson's legal team submitted a new appeal, citing fresh evidence and questioning the reliability of the forensic tests that led to his conviction. This appeal was based on the alleged contamination of the hair samples and other procedural errors during the investigation. In 2018, New Zealand's parole board reviewed Watson's case but denied his release, citing the need for him to show remorse and acknowledge his guilt, which he has steadfastly refused to do. Watson's insistence on his innocence remains a significant barrier to his parole eligibility. That's kind of dumb. I'm not on his side necessarily, but I don't know. In 2020, a documentary series titled Murder on the Blade, aired, reigniting public interest in the case and presenting new interviews and evidence suggesting Watson may have been wrongfully convicted. In 2021, an independent review of the case was commissioned, focusing on the forensic evidence and the possibility of contamination. So there's an article from June 2024 pages of evidence from decades of investigations placed in orderly piles on their desks. Watson's team says this appeal has been 25 years in the making and arose from a royal prerogative of mercy that was lodged in 2017. This was Watson's second appeal. His first, the year after his conviction, was dismissed. The two grounds of appeal were, like I said earlier, I think, problems with the methods police used to identify Watson as the main suspect, and tainted eyewitness identification, including the photo montage police compiled. And yeah, it's definitely been talked about a lot recently, I think, how unreliable, truly unreliable, witness testimony is, as far as identifying a criminal goes. Especially if you're being shown pictures and the cops are like, was it this guy? So, there was the case, the Lovely Bones author lady who got a guy wrongly convicted. So there are questions over the way the ESR, I guess that's the investigative, the cops that investigated it, collected, handled, and examined the forensic evidence, particularly two hairs linked to Olivia Hope that were found on a blanket taken from Watson's boat, the Blade. The Crown says all the issues were canvassed at trial, with 480 Crown witnesses giving testimony that generated more than 3,000 pages of trial transcript. As the fact finders, the Crown says the jury was best placed to weigh all the evidence and determine Watson's guilt or innocence. The Crown also emphasized its case didn't rest on two hairs alone, and Watson's identification wasn't based on a single witness. Watson's team, led by Nick Chisnell Casey, told the court the police exerted significant interrogative and moral pressure to get the key witness, water taxi driver Guy Wallace, who was the last person to see Smart and Hope before they clambered on board a yacht with a mystery man, to change his story. Wallace originally described the mystery man as having long, scraggly hair, in direct contrast to the photos of Watson from that night showing that he had very short hair. Watson's team says the police pressured Wallace to identify their client as the mystery man, showing Wallace a photo of Watson early in the investigation and then pressuring him during a subsequent police interview. The media also reinforced this by showing Wallace an image of Watson. More than 3 months later, Wallace identified Watson in a police montage as the mystery man, which was a claim that he repeated at the trial. Turning to the ESR evidence, they raised questions about the two strands of hair, one 15 centimeters long and the other 25 centimeters long. When a bag containing some 400 dark hairs off the blanket was first examined by ESR in January 1998, no blonde hairs were found. But when it was re-examined in March, 2 blonde hairs were discovered. There was also a small cut found in the bag containing the reference hairs from Olivia Hope. Watson's team said it would have been critical that Hope's reference hairs were examined on the same day at the same workbench as the hairs taken from the blanket. They say it can't be ruled out that the hairs got on the blanket either through transference, Watson picking up the hairs at the party the night of the disappearance, or from contamination in the ESR laboratory. And they argue the DNA evidence used to link the 2 hairs found on the blanket with Hope was overstated at trial, partially because there was no New Zealand database at that time. The Crown case, led by the Deputy Solicitor General, Madeline Larassi, says of the 1,500 people at Furneaux Lodge that night, only Watson had the motive, opportunity, and time to kill the pair and dispose of the bodies. In his closing address at trial, the Crown prosecutor Paul Davidson Casey outlined the characteristics of the killer: a male who was alone, didn't know his victims, and had an intent to kill. That could be any guy who came alone to the party. Larassi told the court, after a 3-month process of methodical elimination at the original trial, only Watson could have been the lone man at Furneaux Lodge that night. Quote, "My submission to this court is looked at fairly and objectively, and in totality, there is overwhelming evidence of Mr. Watson's guilt," she said. The Crown says the witness identification from the montage didn't rest on Wallace's evidence, pointing out half of the 53 people shown montage B identified Watson from it. As the impact of showing Wallace a photo of Watson in the initial stages of the investigation could only be speculative and didn't mean the identification from montage B was unreliable. Of course. The Crown says the issues of transference interference and contamination were well traversed at the trial, where Watson had 4 experts at his disposal. It also rejected attempts by Watson's team to paint the ESR in 1998 as some sort of chaotic substandard laboratory. It says the DNA evidence linking the 2 hairs on the blanket with Hope had become stronger since the trial, as DNA databases had grown over the past 20 years. Laracy told the court that Watson's appeal to succeed, the court needed to find a significant error or errors that had occurred at trial that could have affected the outcome of the trial, and whether there was any fresh evidence that should have been considered at the trial. She said the evidence introduced by Watson's team at this appeal only reached the level of possibility. So, at the time of this article, which, like I said, was, I think, June of this year, it was still being contemplated, and they expected that the decision would take months. And basically, the 3 options that can come out of this trial are dismiss the appeal, quash the conviction and order a high court retrial, or just quash the conviction, and I guess let him go. And the second and third option would come from the court finding a miscarriage of justice had occurred. Watson's team were asking the court for option 3, obviously, to quash the conviction and not order a retrial. So, yeah. I really wanted to find more information about, like, Olivia and Ben, but I couldn't find any information about them at all. Like, which is crazy, because this case had a lot of coverage, and none of that was about the victims, I guess. Yeah. So I found a couple of different articles that are about people who were involved in the reporting of the case, and they're both pretty much on the side of Scott Watson being innocent. And really, there honestly wasn't much evidence. Like, it's pretty crazy. Also, apparently, Guy Wallace, the water taxi driver and one of the main witnesses, apparently he committed suicide somewhat recently. He was on trial, or being suspected anyway, of indecent assault or something like that, some kind of sexual thing against a woman. And in his letter that he left behind, he said he was innocent of that, and he also talked about Scott Watson's conviction. So I guess clearly, years later, like decades later, that was still weighing on him in some way. Because, you know, you wouldn't talk about that in your final letter if you agreed with what happened and you felt like everything was fine, right? I'm trying to see if there's anything extra to say about this from these different articles. Apparently, there were thousands of photos police collected from all the people at the lodge that night, and the mystery catch, the boat that they supposedly got onto, wasn't in a single one of them. There wasn't any picture. And, you know, it was a distinct looking boat, and also a lot of the people there were like boat enthusiasts. So, you know, it's weird that really doesn't add up. Also, apparently the catch wasn't spotted at any time, like before the party, or really after the party, I guess. The police also interviewed a lot of, like, the boat fans that were there, people who liked boats, and none of them mentioned having seen that boat. And like I said, it was a 40-foot long catch with brass portholes and ornate roping. I think it was blue even. Like I said, it was a double-masted boat, and the blade, Scott Watson's boat, only had one mast. I feel like that's not something you would really get wrong, especially if you like boats. Apparently also, all the boats that were docked that night were very close together, but apparently the, like all the slips or whatever, that's what they're called, right? Boat parking spots, slips. Apparently all of them were occupied, so a lot of the boats were tying up to each other instead of to a dock, which meant that they were all very close together, close enough apparently that you'd climb from one railing to another. So 2 people getting murdered inside of one of them probably wouldn't have gone unheard. And no one on any of those boats saw the described catch arriving, and supposedly it arrived that night, and I guess disappeared by morning since no one could find it. That no one saw it, and no one reported being asked by the catch to raft up, which is I guess tying 2 yachts together. During the night, no one said that it happened. So that makes Guy Wallace the only person who ever saw that boat. Maybe it was a ghost ship. Apparently, in his first interview with the police on January 3rd, before the relationship between Wallace and the police broke down, police asked him to draw the yacht that he had seen, and in the sketch that he made, Wallace writes 38 to 40 foot catch with a question mark and the word catch being underlined twice. So, I guess he was pretty sure about it being a catch. Or, he thought it was, but he drew 2 masts on the yacht, one taller than the other. Wallace recalled seeing 2 masts, but he wasn't sure or couldn't remember whether they were both on the same yacht or if the second mast belonged to an adjacent yacht in the raft of boats. So he also described it as being blue and white with portholes and lots of rope, like I said. That was pretty much all the detail that he had. But in subsequent interviews after that, he added more detail, including the brass portholes and ornate roping. And he became very sure that it was a catch. But the more you try to think about details, I feel like you're liable to start making things up, not even on purpose. Apparently, he also felt pretty guilty initially about their disappearance, that he felt personally responsible for helping them into the hands of his killer, basically. Into the hands of their killer, rather. Wallace dropped them off, but felt a shiver, quote, when you know something's wrong and you can't put a finger on it. Quote, I think about that moment all the time. If I just said, take my bed, says Wallace, who had a room at the Forno Lodge to go back to. Quote, it just goes over and over and over. You could call it haunted. It always comes back. What could I have done? Apparently there were a lot of rumors spread about him, and he was focused on very, closely by the press and by the police, which isn't really a surprise since he was the only witness, really, but, that puts a lot of pressure on a person, too. He was grilled by detectives from Christchurch CIB. There were suggestions, he said, that he was somehow responsible for the disappearance, and they accused him of lying and covering it up. Quote, pressure, pressure, pressure. They put so much pressure on me. I couldn't even drive a car coming out from one of the interviews. It's disgusting what they do to you. He also said that some of the locals turned on him and treated him with suspicion. Quote, it was horrible. I walked into the Waikawa Bay Cruising Club, and you could have heard a pin drop. Everyone just shut up. People I'd known for a long time just shunned me. They thought I was guilty. He said the police were dogged in their efforts to make an arrest. Quote, I know in my heart of hearts if he, Scott, wasn't in there, I'd be doing time. It's just that simple. They had to get someone. Apparently, Scott Watson also was repainting his boat in early January, and that obviously is suspicious. But apparently he was painting it on January 1st or 2nd. And, that was before they were even being looked for. Ben and Olivia. But I mean, if you did kill someone, obviously you wouldn't wait until the police were looking for those people to repaint your boat. Apparently he was painting the boat blue, which is the color of the mystery boat. But someone gave him the paint, so he didn't choose the color. Apparently, when Watson was first interviewed by the police, he lied about what he was wearing on New Year's Eve. And then photos came out of what he was wearing, and it was completely different than what he described to police. So that's obviously suspicious, but then on top of that, the police asked him to bring the clothes that he was pictured wearing, and he did not, saying that he couldn't find them because he'd moved around a lot and they could be at quite a few different places. Which, yeah, that sounds pretty suspicious, along with the fact that he didn't really care about finding them, apparently. The police also intercepted and recorded phone calls between Scott Watson and his former girlfriend, which was talked about in court. They used that evidence in court. They had 70 plus hours of Watson's phone conversations, and I guess the girlfriend was in on it because the police gave her questions out of that 70 hours, the court only listened to 40 minutes of edited conversations that were secretly recorded across several months. And apparently, in those recordings, Watson came across as smug, and it came across like his responses to her questions were rehearsed or fudged, and he toyed with her and obfuscated. So, even if that didn't make him seem guilty, it made him seem pretty unlikable. And apparently on top of all that, he never actually once said that he didn't do it. And apparently his demeanor during the trial was not favorable for him. This article adds that the CIA has identified failure to deny as a key indicator of guilt, saying the most important thing to an innocent person is to deny that they did something. The truth is their biggest ally. I don't know about that, because literally the first statement that people usually make is, I didn't do it. Not Scott Watson, apparently, but even people who aren't innocent will still say that they didn't do it. So I feel like denying that you did something doesn't prove that you're telling the truth, right? It's a bit of a stretch. I'm gonna see if I can find out any information about the appeal. There's nothing after June, so I guess they're still contemplating about that. So yeah, I have to keep an eye out for what happens. I am interested in the outcome, obviously. And of course, above everything else, it's extremely sad that Ben and Olivia were killed. Oh yeah, I didn't add this yet, but I think they were pronounced dead in absentia, because their bodies were never found, and no evidence really was ever found, so that's all for that case. Even though it was pretty limited, I do hope